Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
This is my beloved Son. The first time we heard these words was about 7 weeks ago when we stood on the banks of the Jordan River with the crowds and saw Jesus emerge from those chilly waters. With his cousin John doing the honors, Jesus is baptized, and he hears God's words of love echoing in his ears for the first time. And today our season ends with Jesus standing on a mountaintop, and again he hears those words, "This is my beloved Son," but with one important addition this time: listen to him. The season in between those two glorious moments, the season we have been in for these past 7 weeks, is called Epiphany. It's the season of revelation, of getting a glimpse of God in the unlikely person called Jesus of Nazareth, of seeing divinity in this ordinary carpenter, this wandering rabbi. And a little like a Rorschach test, people in Jesus' day saw in him what they wanted to see. For those who didn't get him, the Pharisees, the scribes, the religious leaders, he is a heretic, a troublemaker, someone to keep their eye on. To his friends, he is a visionary, a miracle worker, a crowd pleaser, a budding superstar. They are becoming enthralled with the rumors and the whispers that this Jesus is actually a prophet, maybe Elijah returned, or maybe even the Messiah, the one who's going to ride in and rescue them from the oppression of the Roman Empire and put Israel back on top, put Israel back on the map. And they are ready to follow this Jesus into glory. Jesus, however, sees himself quite differently. He resists all those labels. He doesn't need attention. His priorities are showing compassion and forgiveness, of speaking truth to power and sharing his love unconditionally. When he hears God call him my beloved, he doesn't hear a call to greatness, but instead a mandate to go and find the forgotten people in the overlooked places and let them know that God's love is with them too. All the accolades only make him seem uncomfortable. He just wants to serve. He doesn't care if anyone notices or not. Now, we aren't used to role models like this. The people we idolize claim to be the best at everything. Oscar winners, athletes with their own line of designer shoes, billionaire politicians, celebrity couples with hybrid names like Brangelina and J-Rod. We use metaphors like reaching for the brass ring and climbing the ladder of success and king of the hill when we tell stories of our heroes and their accomplishments. We like people who make it to the top. And it really wasn't all that different in Jesus' day. Caesar declared himself a god. Pontius Pilate traveled always with a full-armed entourage, and King Herod just flaunted his wealth every chance he got. And everyone else around wanted to get close enough to them to bask in the glow of their self-proclaimed greatness. Even the disciples fall into this trap, always wanting to sit at the head of the table, jockeying to see who is best, to see who is Jesus' favorite. So Peter, James, and John must have thought they won the lottery when Jesus picked them to go up the mountain with him. I mean, it set them apart. It made them special. For this was clearly no ordinary hike. When they got to the top of the mountain, they're astonished to see Jesus begin to glow with dazzling, almost blinding light. And to their further amazement, they see the prophets Moses and Elijah standing there as well. I mean, these guys are the big league. They represented two of the most influential and sacred ancestors for the Jewish people, and Jesus, their guy, their Jesus, is just standing there chatting with them like they are old friends. So this was a moment of true glory. It was something to be savored. And Peter, who is always the most overeager and frankly rather clueless of all the disciples. He just can't contain himself. He's got to mark this moment, and not just mark it, he has to enshrine it. This, he thinks, is what it's all about. This is what it's all been leading to. This is what it means to be God's beloved. The reason Jesus is here. It makes Caesar and Pilate and Herod look like runners-up on Celebrity Apprentice. But then the cloud comes over, and a voice, God's voice, booms from the sky. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And the mood changes entirely, and they get a little nervous. For suddenly they remember what Jesus had been telling them all those years between the river and the mountaintop. That following him means suffering for love. It means bearing each other's burdens and welcoming the outcast and feeding the hungry and caring for the sick. It means fighting for justice and standing up against oppression. It isn't glamorous or glorious. It's mostly just hard and often thankless. Even when they want to make a big deal about this dazzling moment, mountaintop moment, and tell everyone about it, Jesus says, hush, to Peter. The glory they see in him is a thing he wants to keep quiet. He doesn't want this to be what people focus on. He cares more about the glory unseen. For the view from that high mountaintop wasn't of a sparkling heaven. It was actually of a struggling city, the city of Jerusalem. A place of heartbreak and cruelty and longing. A place where people hungered for bread and justice. Where they are burdened by politics and an oppressive piousness. Where the temple looms large in the center of the town, but the people feel so disconnected from God. It's in this place, down in the valley in Jerusalem, where Jesus' ministry of love will come face to face with the powers of hate and violence and fear. Here, the adoring crowds will turn into angry mobs, and the road will get rocky and dangerous. And glory as we know it will be in very short supply. So I get why Peter wants to stay safe on that mountain, basking in the glow, why he believes this dazzling moment is the apex of Jesus' career. How could it not be? Most of us would. But Jesus knows these moments, as amazing as they are fleeting, and they ought to be. For being God's beloved is not a fixed and static experience. It's not something we hold on to, keeping it just for ourselves. It's not about being a spectator to what's happening in the world. It's not about staying removed from the messiness and the heartbreak of what it means to be a human being. Being God's beloved is an invitation to true empowerment, to take that identity and because of it, to live differently. Allowing it to sustain and inspire us as we make our way back into the real world, into that dark valley below, knowing as Jesus does that God always goes with us to where the real glory is, the small everyday acts of love and justice that no one notices. His disciples struggle with that concept. They constantly dream of the glory to come. Even when Jesus talks about the resurrection, they see it as him winning the ultimate prize, defeating his enemies, showing his power. But Jesus is far more humble about it. For him, it's all about God and what God can do in the midst of our darkness and struggle. It's about what comes after every day, after the glory. As theologian Nancy Rockwell says, perhaps we could say that the glory of God is not about winning the next election or the size of the crowds. It's not about basking in recognition. The glory that shone around Jesus on that mountaintop may simply have been about truth and light, about loving the same people that Moses and Elijah cared about. Moses, who grew up a prince and gave his life to a ragtag bunch of folks who had nothing of value and hardly any hope at all. And Elijah, who bravely confronted a corrupt king and then had to hide in the wilderness, turning to help to a famished widow and her son, saving them as they saved him, one crumb at a time. And of course, Jesus, who brought another ragtag group, heirs of those Hebrew slaves, to an upper room and fed them crumbs and the ceremonial cup of Elijah, and then went out to pray before he died. No glory, no dazzle, just God's love to carry with him into the uncertainty and the darkness to come. This is what it looks like to be God's beloved. It's not Klieg lights and applause and best-selling albums. It's not about leading in the polls or cleaning up on Oscar night. It's not, as Peter would have wished, about keeping ourselves up in that high place, polishing our halos, staying apart from the world and its problems. It's about rolling up our sleeves and aligning our hearts and hands with those who need God's love the most. It's about listening to the words of Jesus and leaving the glow of the mountaintop to follow in his steps, going where the road will take us, bringing all that dazzling belovedness into the dark valleys, over the rocky ground, into the unknown territory, and meeting God in the glory unseen. May it be so. Amen.